50 Tory MPs, including 4 former cabinet ministers, have demanded that the government scrap inheritance tax. You heard that right. They don't want to lower the rate, they don't want to raise the threshold, they want to bin it completely. The campaign is being led by the Conservative Growth Group. That's a coalition of MPs allied to flash-in-the-pan PM Liz Truss. And one of those is former Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi. Now, you might remember him from when he tried to run for Tory leader after Boris Johnson's resignation. However, his complicated financial arrangements led to this awkward interview on Sky News.
Is it true that your family benefits from an offshore trust?
My family does not benefit from an offshore. I don't benefit from an offshore trust, nor does my wife. We don't benefit at all from that. My mother and father live abroad. That's their business. They don't live in the United Kingdom.
Have you ever had non-dom status?
I've never had non-dom status.
Have you ever used an offshore company to avoid tax?
Never have used an offshore company.
Has your family?
My wife has never been non-dom. She's never used offshore status or a company to avoid tax.
Have you told us everything about your business affairs that could potentially impact on your future ability to be Prime Minister?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever used offshore companies or services firms based in tax havens for the purchase of property or properties in the UK?
No, I haven't.
Have you fully declared all of your properties in the MP's register of interests?
Yes, we have.
Did you pay the requisite taxes, including stamp duty, when purchasing properties?
Yes.
You or your company once held £20 million of Yugo shares in a Gibraltar-based company. What was the reason for using offshore financial structures like this, if not for the purpose of avoiding tax?
I was not a beneficiary of the Balshore investment that held those shares. And
who was?
My family. It's on public record. My father.
But why would you do that if it wasn't for the purpose of avoiding tax?
Because he lives abroad. He doesn't live in the United Kingdom.
Okay, 2 final questions, if I may. Just to clarify, 110%, obviously you're Chancellor, so you know it can't be 110%, but just work with me here. There is no way that any funds are being funneled into your parents' accounts or whatever, so to keep your hands clean?
Absolutely.
Those shady financial arrangements didn't just result in a difficult interview. They also led to Zahawi being sacked as chair of the Tory party when it emerged he'd paid a 7-figure fine to HMRC over tax irregularities. So colour me surprised that the man who doesn't like paying any tax is against inheritance tax. In a piece penned for The Telegraph, Zahawi says this: "The most natural feeling in the world for any parent is to want to look after their children. This feeling is so powerful that it stays with us until our last breath, and even beyond. We all want to leave the world a better place for those who follow us, and leaving behind what we have built and earned in life is a crucial part of that. But those assets, from the family home to the rainy day fund, are all at risk of being taken away from our kids by the only other force as ineluctable as death, the taxman. Inheritance tax is that other spectre that haunts us alongside death. As well as being morally wrong to take someone's assets on their death, it also creates all sorts of inefficient and damaging distortions in our personal finances and the wider economy. We all want to leave the world a better place for those who follow us, and leaving behind what we have built and earned in life is a crucial part of that. How noble! Just for the record, I also want to leave the world a better place for the many generations that will come after us, the innumerable thousands of generations that come after us. But Nadhim Zahawi isn't thinking in those terms. He wants to leave all of his wealth to his kids. Now, at the moment, you don't pay inheritance tax on any assets up to the value of £325,000. And if you leave any amount above that threshold to your spouse or civil partner, you don't pay anything on that either. Anything that you leave to your kids over £325,000 is taxed at 40%, except if it's your home. Then, if you leave it to your kids, it can be worth up to £500,000 without accruing any tax. So here's an example. You die with a house worth £600,000 with another £200,000 in the bank, lucky you, and you want to leave it all to your children. Just £120,000 goes to the Treasury, meaning after tax, those kids will still stand to inherit £680,000. That's a tax rate of just 15%, a lot lower than income tax. Of course, the wealthier you are, the higher that rate becomes. This graph from the Telegraph is based on the data from the Office for Budget Responsibility. It shows how Treasury income from inheritance tax has increased over time. In 1999, HMRC took just £2 billion of inheritance tax. By 2022, it had increased to £7 billion. And by 2027, inheritance tax revenues are expected to be over £8 billion. If inheritance tax has been growing, so has wealth. So where has it been coming from? As ever with the UK, the answer is very simple: property prices. This graph is from the accounting firm RSM. It compares the percentage by which house prices have grown since 2010 to the percentage by which inheritance tax revenues have grown in the same period. You can see a real correlation here, and that property prices increase in line with inheritance tax, but inheritance tax increases faster than property prices. Why? Because between 2010 and now, house prices have grown by 76%, while inheritance tax revenues have grown by 197%. And as time goes on and house prices grow, more and more properties find themselves above the taxable threshold. That's why that line is significantly higher. Now let's go back to that Zahawi article. As a self-made man, I'm proud to think that alongside giving to charities, I will be able to leave behind something to my family, something. When my race is finally run, this is human nature, and even more true for the less affluent than it is for the wealthy, not that he would know. According to the Treasury, 93% of people who die aren't liable for any inheritance tax. So binning inheritance tax directly helps hardly anyone, although it does deprive the Treasury. And of course, they have to get that money from somewhere else instead. And for many of the 7% that are taxed, there isn't much self-made about it. Ask the Duke of Westminster. It's more a feature of buying a house in the right place at the right time for most people. A fairer way of reducing their inheritance tax bill is to control property prices, perhaps, something that the market looks like it may be doing anyway, if house prices are to be believed, because they've been falling since November last year, at least if measured annually. So who is Zahawi's proposal really for? Well, it's for people like him, the very wealthy who own multiple properties. As reported, while he was Chancellor, Zahawi owns a £100 million property portfolio, 100 million. Making him one of the richest MPs in Parliament. His kids or other family would stand to gain around £40 million from property alone if inheritance tax was scrapped. £40 million is what this would mean to him. Maybe it's just me, but it seems like he's campaigning to save himself some cash. Like I said, tens of millions of pounds. But I think there may even be a more insidious reason for putting inheritance tax back on the political agenda. As prices fall, property begins to look like a less secure vehicle for wealth growth, and investment flight from the property market affects the wealth of those heavily exposed to it, like Zahawi. But what better way to make that market more buoyant than to, for instance, get the government to cut inheritance tax rates on property by the next election? Now, I think this is a clear conflict of interest. It's like an MP who owns a brewery trying to scrap tax on lager. And most concerning of all, it's done in plain sight and with seeming impunity. Zahawi is talking about these things in some of the country's most prominent newspapers. That says something very toxic about our political system in this country.